Hello everyone, this is Alison Gross, and I'm being joined by Thor here today. He's being super affectionate. So, several months back, I did a video about my fear of flying, and I talked about how I was going to Romania in 5 days, and I said that I would make a follow up video. Um, So I wanted to make a follow-up video now to let everybody know how that whole situation is. So I went to Romania and they loved me there. I was the most professionally appreciated that I have ever been in my life. And oh, here comes Phineas back from the store. I will have to pause this. Probably. And it will probably scare the kitty away. Not good. And then I went on my cruise in December. And then I went back to Romania last week. I actually got in last night. Yep, here we Oh, Thor. Hmm. Okay, I'm back. And the kitty is back too, but he's a little bit further down, so you can't see him very well. He's actually lying on my arm, so I can't move it now. Kitties are being super affectionate because we just got back last night. So they were by themselves for a week, and they did not like it at all. Uh, so, um, yeah, so I just got back from my second trip to Romania, and so I kind of have a permanent job there now, and they also are they've made arrangements to get me a PhD there, to because that having a PhD will allow them to pay me more for the work I do, and hopefully will also mean that I can get paid more at my jobs in America. But this is like I am basically permanently committed to going over there at least twice a year now. So lots and lots and lots of flying. But this is good because, and I've known this ever since the beginning, and this is part of the problem, is that the only real cure for being afraid of flying is flying. And that when you do it enough, your body learns how to process it. Um, I actually got air legs on this return trip. It mostly has stopped now. I had it really bad last night, and I had it a tiny bit this morning, but I think I've reset it now. This used to happen to me all the time when I was younger. I don't know if it's an actual thing. I call it air legs because it's like in olden days, sailors would get what they call sea legs, where they would, their sort of motion and balance center in their brain after being on a ship and feeling the ship move would readjust so that they would not really feel the ship moving when they were on the ship. Their body just would naturally compensate for it, and they could move around on the ship without it, without having balance issues when the ship is moving and stuff. But the downside would be that when their ship would come into land and they would get off, they would like stumble around for a while, and people would describe that they would feel like the ground was still moving under them and stuff because their brains had readjusted to assume that that was natural and stuff. And I have found that this happens to me on airplanes when I'm relaxed enough that your body adjusts and you don't feel the motion nearly as much. But then after my trip is over and I get off, I feel disoriented for a while and I'll feel the ground kind of bouncing under me. Um, and so this was happening a lot yesterday. It's unpleasant, but it's also a good sign because it means that I'm adjusting back. Um, so essentially, have my attempts to cure my fear of flying worked? They've not worked 100% yet, but definitely progress is being made. Um, so this trip, turbulence was way, way worse than on the first trip, but I was much more relaxed. I like the first trip, I was like, really tense a lot of the time. And when people were like, how was your trip? I'd be like, I'm fine. My boyfriend has a lot of fingerprints in his arms. Because I was just like digging my nails into him most of the time. And there was like none of that this time. I was able to tune it out most of the time. I don't know what happened. My father said we hit the jet stream, which I guess can happen when you go around the North Pole, which is usually if you go to Europe or if you go like to Asia, you usually go around the North Pole because it's faster. And you can, if you hit the jet stream wrong, I think that they do maybe kind of try to hit the jet stream a little bit because if you can get into it right, it'll like push you along faster. But it kind of reminds me of a book I read a long time ago about again about sailing. That this guy was like, oh, there's this big storm and we're gonna try to catch it. If we can catch it like just right, we will fly like like a 5-pound shot in a 10-pound cannon. That it will really make us go faster and it will save us a lot of time and stuff. And this guy's like, well, what if we catch it wrong? And the guy says, then we'll be like 10 pounds a shot in a 5-pound cannon, which you can use your imagination there. And I think to a certain extent, it's kind of like that with the jet stream. It's just how strong it is or whether or not you fully hit it. It's when every time you go around. Like, I think there was a little bit of it, like, I noticed all 4 times that I've crossed the Atlantic now in the past, like, 8 months or whatever, the worst turbulence of the flight has been, like, right in the middle of the flight, like, right when we would be going around the pole where the jet stream would be. But it was significantly more severe on the outward trip this time than it has been either on the return trip or on either of the trips the last time. And there were, like, that was extremely unpleasant for me, partially because I really needed to use the bathroom. And it was like, they had the seatbelt set on permanently for about like 2 or 3 hours. And trying to hold it for that long was really unpleasant. And it was also the type of turbulence, like, it wasn't like we had continuous low-grade turbulence. We would have these short, like, minute or so bursts of really severe turbulence, and then they would die down again. So it was really unpredictable. Like, because I didn't want to be out of my seat when that happened. But there was no, like, sometimes you can kind of tell, okay, we're in a less, I mean, you can never 100% tell. Even if nothing's happening, you can hit what's called clear air turbulence, which, based on my research I've done, is actually one of the number one things that makes people afraid to fly. Like, if you already are used to flying and something happens to you to make you afraid to fly, hitting clear air turbulence is one of the top things, and I think that's what happened to me. That you just, um, you'll be flying, and there's these pockets that are apparently the equipment to detect them is getting better, but with conventional flying equipment, they are very hard to detect. And it'll be just but you'll get like a couple minutes of really bad turbulence as you pass through the pocket. And what will happen is it will happen with no warning because the pockets are hard to detect. And obviously, if that happens to somebody, like, I'm pretty sure like, I don't know if they announced it or not because I was asleep, but you know, that kind of experience, like, that's apparently one of the number one things that spooks people out of flying. But it's not that common. Like, my father says, with all of the times that he has flown, like, um he does the Romania trip at least twice a year, like what I'm going to be doing now. He also does a trip to Japan at least once a year, and he sometimes does other things. Like, he did a trip to China recently. He's done work in the Republic of Georgia. Um, the plan is in like half a month, he's going back to Romania to meet up with the other people there, and they're all going to some Eastern European planning conference in Kazan. That's the plan. It may not happen because the Russians are apparently not being super nice about getting him a visa to go right now. But with the amount of flying he's done, he says that he has only had that kind of sudden, severe, like, clear air turbulence twice in his entire life. One was the time when I was there, and the other time was when he was on a plane in South America back in the 1970s or 1960s, actually, because my brother was born in 71. It was before he was born. So I kind of feel like that doesn't count because air technology has gotten so much better since then that, it's very rare, but it can happen. But, because of this pattern that it would like have very little or like almost nothing, and then it would suddenly flare up, and it just kept doing this for like 3 hours. I didn't want to get out of my seat and go to the bathroom, so that was highly, highly unpleasant. And I did feel a mini drop during that. Like, I felt one, like, 5-second drop during that whole 3 hours. There were a couple of times when I felt, and this is the one thing that's left that does make me still kind of anxious, is when I feel the wind catch the plane really strongly. And it's not just that the plane shakes or bounces, but I can really feel it, like, jerk to the side or tip or something, because I can feel the wind is grabbing it that strong. And it's a different feeling. You can feel how it's different, and that happened a few times, and it made me kind of anxious. Oh, I'm getting my motion distortion. I'm feeling like a little bit of bouncing right now, just as I'm sitting on the couch here. And then the other thing was that United, I don't know if it's because of Easter weekend. So normally we fly from Chicago to Munich, and then we switch to this like little commuter plane and fly from Munich to Cluj, which sometimes, because it's a little commuter plane and we're going over the Alps, that can be kind of unpleasant. It was kind of unpleasant on the last trip in November. This time we had beautiful weather. It was pretty okay. I actually looked out the window and saw the clouds in the Alps, and it was really nice. But then this time we were gonna come back on Monday. Like, we were actually gonna come back tomorrow. I'm recording this on Easter Sunday. We were gonna come back on Monday so that we could spend Easter in Romania, because Romania is still a very religious country, so Easter is like a big deal for them. And they have a large population of both Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, And this year, Easter happened to fall at the same time for both of them. And so there was going to be this just giant extravaganza celebration. But for some reason, United was not running any flights back from Europe, like today or tomorrow, or like, and my father couldn't wait until to come back on Tuesday because of his job or something. And so we had to come back yesterday, and they weren't running a direct flight from Munich to Chicago yesterday. We had to fly from Munich to Newark, and then we had to take this stupid tiny commuter plane from Newark to Chicago. It was the last leg of the trip. We were exhausted because we had to wake up at 4 a.m. to get on the commuter flight from Cluj to Munich. Then we had a 5-hour layover in Munich, and then almost a 9-hour transatlantic crossing. Then we got to Newark, and they made us go through customs in Newark and then go back through security to get back into the... And the customs and security at Newark is a freaking mess, and it's not... So we were exhausted, really stressed out, blah, 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 blah. And then we get on this tiny plane, and I don't know why. It's really unseasonably warm here. We were flying over the lakes. I don't know what was going on. But we had one spot of very bad, very unpleasant turbulence. And then we... that was Thor as he leaves. And then the landing, the final landing was awful. And I actually heard the stewardess talking, like, as people were leaving about how bad it was. And we actually did this thing when we landed and we were on the runway, and they're like braking on the runway. The plane started like doing this, like it was, the back end was like shimmying back and forth, like when you're in a car and you brake on ice. And it was kind of funny because Fornius is like not scared of flying at all, I guess because he's never had a bad experience or whatever. You know, he'd never flown in his life. Like, the first time he ever got on a plane was a 24-hour flight from Australia to come move in with me. And he's like, he doesn't even notice turbulence. It doesn't bother him at all, but he doesn't... And this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about conventional treatment for fear of flying and why I think that it's pretty bogus. But he doesn't know, he doesn't understand anything about how airplanes work or anything, basically. And so we had to take a smaller plane on a transatlantic flight, and I was freaking out because I was worried that it would be more turbulent.
What are you talking about?
I'm doing my follow-up TMI episode about my fear of flying.
Okay. Why are you talking about me?
Because I'm talking about how you don't know anything about how planes work, but you're not scared. But even though I know it, I am. And
I know how planes work. I just don't know how airports work.
Nobody knows how airports work.
Exactly.
So, you know, so frequently he'll be like, oh, why is it doing this or whatever? And, like, so, like, we were landing, and this is when we were landing in Newark, and it was a little bit turbulent. Like, I was mildly anxious or something, but I was, like, he was asking me, are we dropping or something like that, and I was, like, explaining to him how the descent worked. Or he said, are we descending or are we leveled off? And I said, no, you, like, drop a little bit. It's not like takeoff where you go straight up and then you level off. It's like you drop and then you fly at that height for a while and then you drop again. And I was explaining to him about how the wing flaps work, and, like, because we always get seats over the wing because that's where it's the most stable. And so we were looking out the window and I was showing him the wing flaps and stuff. It's just kind of weird, like, you know. And I remember the first time when we flew to California together and we landed, and they do the braking thing where it really, like, you get this giant rush, like it feels like it's speeding up, like you're gonna take off again when it lands on the ground, and you can actually see the flaps come all the way up because they're braking really hard and stuff. And he's like, "Is that normal?" And I'm like, "Oh," and I'm like, "It's totally normal. It's totally normal." But he was afraid we were gonna veer off the runway and hit something because that's not normal, like for it to do that. I mean, I'm sure it's not dangerous, but it is unusual. But here's the thing. So there were both of those experiences, the thing where we hit the jet stream or whatever, and that one. And they were very unpleasant, and I kind of went into my little space, which I'll talk about in a second. But I was never like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Like, I did not feel that once on this trip. The more minor turbulence, I was just like, whatever. It didn't bother me. Um, and so how have I done this? Because I know that there's a lot of people, like, I've read statistics, and the statistics say like 6 to 10% of people have a fear of flying that's so severe that it prevents them from flying. And then of the people who do fly, 30% experience anxiety. So that's like almost 40% of people or something. I don't know. So it's a very, very common thing. And there are all these programs. And I struggled for years. I could not find anything that worked. And now I have managed to do it. And the approach I used is completely not conventional and not similar to what the normal recommendations are, which is part of why I wanted to talk about it. So basically, as I said before, and I think most people do understand this, but the only cure for fear of flying is flying. You just do it until your body stops fighting it and accepts it. Now the question is, there has to be a way to take the edge off in the meantime so that you don't like die of anxiety or puke all over yourself or something. There has to be a way that you get yourself into the air the first time. And I'm very fortunate in that, I went through this process when I was a child. My first flight ever when I was 4, my parents took me to Disneyland in California. That was our first like big family vacation. They took us to this resort in California, and we get to go to the beaches, and then we drove down the coast to Los Angeles and went to Disneyland, and stuff. And I mean, I don't remember it that clearly, but I remember that it scared me. I remember, being worried and like crying and stuff during turbulence. And it was actually because we'd probably passed through, we were right above a cloud layer, one of those rolling cloud layers. And now I know that you usually do experience some turbulence when you go through that. And I remember my father telling me that we were driving on a cloud road, but it was a bumpy cloud road because you could see the rolls in the clouds. And I remember I really, really enjoyed the trip, but the flying was so terrifying for me. I remember as a 4-year-old, I was trying to train myself to be able to fly. Like, I would jump off the couch or off of anything and like flap my arms really fast so that I could learn how to fly, so I could travel without having to go in an airplane. Or even if I could, like, if it'd be too physically taxing to do it for all those hours, what I could do is skip takeoff, which was the scariest part, and fly up to the plane and have them let me in or something. So, obviously, this was something that I had to deal with as a child. And then my father's job happened, or the fact that my father started doing all of this international work. And first of all, part of my advice, which for adults can't help, but if you have a child, start them young. And when it comes to flying, total immersion actually helps. So, my second time ever getting on a plane, like I did that trip to California at age 4, and it was unpleasant enough to me that I tried to come up with these childishly imaginative ways to avoid flying in the future. Fast forward like 2 years, like I think I was 6. I get on my second flight ever. It is a 12-hour flight to Tokyo. And I mean, I was nervous. I remember as a child during takeoff, which was the scariest part and still in many ways is the scariest part to me. It's also the most fun part in some ways. But I would curl into a tiny ball. I had like, it wasn't my special stuffed animal, but it was like my special My Little Pony, and I would hold it and curl myself into a ball and like put my head under like the pillow they would give you and just shake. But I was 6. I didn't have a choice. So I did this 12-hour flight to Tokyo and back. And, but when you're on a plane that trip for that long, there's long periods of time when nothing bad happens. And then, the year or two later, my father went back to Japan, and my mom didn't want to go with him that time, so we went to Hawaii. And that was an awful flight. We had bad turbulence the entire time. And as I found out again this time when we hit the jet stream, well, I also now drink copious amounts of water because being on a plane, like, horribly dehydrates you. But also, when I get nervous, I need to pee really badly. And so as a child, I spent half of that trip in the restroom. Of course, because the seatbelt sign was on the entire time, my mom was like, "Oh my God, stop getting out of your seat." And I'm like, "I have to pee." And it was just like this vicious cycle. And I didn't understand how flying worked back then. I didn't understand that they announced things way in advance. I was afraid because, there was all the turbulence and the seatbelt sign was on. I was like, "Oh my God, are they just going to land while I'm in the restroom and that will like kill me or something?" Because I didn't know. So that was highly unpleasant. Jump forward to the next year, a year after that. I'm 9. My father gets a job in Indonesia. Back in the day, apparently now planes are faster, they can carry more fuel, blah, 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 blah. So, like, Fornius' trip from Australia was only 24 hours. And I know that Indonesia's a little bit farther, but trip to Indonesia and back, like each leg, like one way, 55 hours. Yes. And it's not just like a 55-hour flight where you just take off and then you chill out and then you land after 55 hours. No, I mean, planes can't carry enough fuel to stay airborne for 55 hours. But so this is the idiocy of it. So we flew from Lansing Airport to Minneapolis. And this was this weird commuter flight. So it stopped in Kalamazoo to let people get off and get on. Like, this is one of the only times I've ever seen a plane be like a train where it like just keeps stopping and people get off and get on it. Like, not everybody gets off the plane. Like, it's just like a couple people get off and leave and some other people get on and then it goes to the next city. I don't think they really do that anymore. It's very weird. But that's like a 10-minute flight. Like, you just basically go up and come down to go from Lansing to Kalamazoo. It's ridiculous. So we did that. And then we flew from there to Minneapolis. We changed planes, flew from Minneapolis to Los Angeles. Had several hours layover in Los Angeles, went to the beach. Somebody, I think my mom, got food poisoning in the process. We boarded Garuda, which is, I don't even know if they still exist, but it's the shit ass Indonesian airline. Which apparently can't carry very much fuel. So we then flew from there. We stayed on the same plane for the rest of the time, but we had to land in Hawaii and refuel. They wouldn't let it, like, they let us get off the plane. We had to go to this, like, 5 foot square roped in space in the airport. They wouldn't even, like, let us, like, have a drink or anything. We couldn't leave this space. Then we flew from there to Biak, which is some tiny outlying island that's technically owned by Indonesia. And then from there we flew to Bali, which was where we were staying for a while. So 55 hours in transit. That's Kalamazoo, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Hawaii, Biak, Bali. That's 6 takeoff and landings. By the time we transferred in Los Angeles, I was like, I don't give a fuck. You know, whatever the hell could happen on an airplane, and I just don't care anymore. I mean, and one of the things, like, dealing with my fear of flying now, I remember the process. Like, I was doing the thing where I cramp into a little ball and, like, got scared, during takeoff, and I would do that to a certain extent during landing. I watched part of the landing in Minneapolis. By the time that we Los Angeles, I watched the entire landing, and I don't remember exactly when it happened, but by the time we got to Bali, I was looking out the window the whole time during takeoff as well. And this is a pattern that I followed this time too, that I be really scared during takeoff at first. And I would purposely, like, during takeoff and landing, like, look at the ground, try not to look out the window, in the hopes that not seeing the motion reference outside would make it feel less. Occasionally that's the case, but the fact of the matter is that actually in flying, like, the plane doesn't actually move that much. One of the things that they've said in order to, like, if you're nervous about flying, to gauge turbulence, and I do this sometimes, it's like, order a glass of water and keep the glass of water on your tray table. 90% of the time, like 99.999% of the time, you will not encounter turbulence that will be severe enough to spill water out of the glass. I mean, and that's a way to gauge, like, even if the water does spill, it doesn't mean the plane is going to crash. But the point is to put it in perspective, because you don't have a point of reference. It feels like there's more motion than it is. That you can look and you can see. Usually there's just little tiny ripples on the top of the water glass. And then sometimes you'll hit it enough that makes it slosh around a little bit. But you will almost never hit anything that is severe enough to spill the water. The problem is that because there's no point of reference, it feels like you're moving more than you are. So actually, and I used to do this as a child, but if I look out the window, and sometimes there's no point of reference or it's too far away, but like during takeoff and landing, or if we're flying like near clouds that are close enough that I can actually see like individual stuff, then I do have a point of reference. And even if it feels like you're just falling, you can look out the window and see that that's not true. So I've gradually been watching takeoff and landing more. I was able to watch takeoff for the first time on the return trip from Miami after our cruise. And then so I'm fortunate in that I did this process as a child, and I'm able to remember the process and remember the stages I went through and be able to recognize those stages, so I know, oh, hey, I'm making progress, etc., etc. And that's an advantage for people who have become adults, never having a period where they weren't afraid to fly. that they don't have that advantage. I still recommend, at least to a certain extent, total immersion because I was petrified to get on that first flight to Munich. But once I had done that, it was like, oh my God, you did this. And being in the air for so long, your body is forced to adjust to it. Um, but the question is, how do you get to that point where you get on that first flight and stuff? Um, and so here's the thing. Most conventional programs to teach fear of flying deal with the mental aspect. And I think this is a serious problem because, well, not just because, it doesn't work for me. Like, a lot of it is based around them educating you on how planes work and on the different noises and the different sensations and everything. And the thing is that, I have that knowledge. I've had that knowledge since I was like 8 or 9. And it didn't help me in the situation. I hit clear air turbulence and it freaked me out. Obviously, I do think that's an important component, though I think it is better to learn that through real experience than sitting in a class. Like, I don't think sitting in a class and having somebody lecture to you about how planes work and how planes are safe is really gonna help. The ones where they actually take you on a flight and there's somebody that like sits with you and explains what's happening as things with the different stages of the flight, I do think that's useful. That's the other thing is to, if you can, sit near where the stewardess seats are. We always do that for the transatlantic crossing because it's the bulkhead area. The seats give you more space. But they, on the plane that we use, are front to back with the seats that the stewardesses sit in when they're like off or something, or during takeoff and landing. But even if not all flights have that, like on smaller planes, there isn't like a bulkhead area with stewardess seats. They have like little seats either in like the front or the back of the plane, or something. But even if you are on a flight where you can't get seats like that, you can still watch what they're doing, because this is the basic thing. If they are up and walking around, everything is safe. They will have the flight staff take their seats long before you reach the stage where anything is dangerous. Even if they are sitting down, like during takeoff and landing, or at the one point when we were hitting the most severe turbulence in the jet stream, there was like a 30-minute period or something where they had the flight staff seat themselves. Even then, watch them. If they're calm, because they've seen it all. So if they're calm, even like depending, talk to them. And having a conversation with them will not only be distracting to you, but it will, you'll be able to see that they're totally calm. One of the flight staff was like passing by or sitting down opposite us on the first transatlantic crossing in November, and I was like shredding up Fornius's arm because we hit what in retrospect was fairly mild turbulence, and she was like, "It's okay." So watching them, so that was one of the things when we were taking the little tiny like commuter plane from Newark yesterday, and I was like, because it was very unpleasant. And they kept making announcements that I couldn't fully understand and stuff, and I was like, oh God, what's happening? But they were still doing the beverage service, and I'm like, we are not in danger if they are still doing beverage service. Yes, occasionally you will hit clear air turbulence. but that is rare. Like if it is regular turbulence, they've put on the seatbelt sign, they've announced it, and they are still doing beverage service. It's okay. um, so that, I mean, that's one of the things that's, very helpful for me that I see as a gauge. Um, that's useful for me. But so I think actually having somebody there to like talk to you during the flight, and my father was fairly experienced at flying, so when I was a child, there was that, like, he would say to me, like, oh, they're taking up the landing gear now, look out the window, you can see the flaps on the wings, um, stuff like that. So I guess I did have some of that training, but again, it was in flight training. It wasn't like, oh, we'll explain this to you and somehow that makes it okay. The other thing is that the way that this is addressed and the way a lot of anxieties and phobias are addressed is teaching you to outthink your fear. Our society, I could go on about this for hours, but I won't. Our society has a problem with emotions. They have a problem with accepting the true power and sort of overwhelmingness and uncontrollability of emotions. And so the way they teach you how to deal with these things, and the way that most fear of flying treatments that I have seen attempt to do it, is head over heart. Your brain masters your heart. This does not work for me. And I think that there's a fair number of people that it probably doesn't work for. The system that I have found is what I refer to as heart versus heart. You deal with the negative emotion by finding another emotion that will challenge and supersede it. And I've done this basically, and I talked about this a bit in my first video, by using my aerial training and by listening to heavy metal. Like, that is that's 100%. That's my secret. So I told you about how I saw this hypnotist, and she set up a hypnosis link in my brain between aerial and flying. And so I found that when I go to aerial class and I do well at aerial and I feel confident about it, I feel better about flying. If I get really nervous and scared in aerial, because that does happen sometimes, I feel more scared about flying. So I actually went to an aerial class like 6 hours before the flight. I went that morning, and there was this drop. I'm going to insert a video here, I think, that I took during that class of me doing this drop. And I don't know, I'll voice over something about this, but this drop terrifies me. So I did it, and I took this video, and then I would watch the video during the flight when I would get scared, to remind myself I had done something way more dangerous and terrifying already. Okay, here we go. This is this video. So I am upside down like 10 feet in the air, holding on with one hand here. And keep in mind that the thing that scares me most about flying is being in free fall. Oops, I kind of messed up there. It's going to be fast. You might miss it. So this is the first drop I've done where I changed direction in midair. So talking about free fall, so here it is. This is holding on because I'm terrified. And so look how I changed direction in midair there. The sensation of doing that is utterly terrifying. Like, yeah. So, and on a larger basis, aerial, it is something like it taught me there are fears that are worth confronting. There are fears that are, in my opinion, not worth confronting. I would shit myself to death if I ever tried to ride a roller coaster. I'm not going to try to learn how to do that because I don't see the point. It does nothing for me. However, to do aerial, which is deeply meaningful to me, or to be able to fly in order to take advantage of this new job, or to go on vacation, or to be with my family, that is worth it for me. And Ariel has taught me in a situation where, like, because I am petrified all the time. I mean, you saw that freaking thing that I did. Like, oh God. And just, understanding that it's necessary and I've had to learn how to cope with it. Like, has taught me, like, my body knows how to cope when I'm afraid now. And how to, so I talked about how I do Kundalini yoga, and I do the Anna Brett Ravi Singh videos. They're cheesy, they're hokey in a lot of ways, and some people say, oh, it's not real Kundalini yoga. I don't know. It's useful to me, but they say a lot of cheesy, hokey things. But they'll often say things like to change fear into excitement, or fear is exhilaration without the correct breath, or whatever. But I've learned that to be true in Ariel. The in that medium, the tightrope line between being petrified and feeling like the most amazing, most accomplished person in the world is so narrow. And that is, I've been able to transfer that feeling and be able to walk that tightrope in regards to flying. I mean, even when I was younger, when I wasn't afraid to fly, like I wasn't afraid to fly, but I would still get scared on flights where we would hit like really bad turbulence. Like I would have been scared on the New York to Chicago flight I did yesterday. Like even in the best case, I would have been scared. It's just like I would have gotten off and been like, that was a tiny plane. I'm going to try to avoid tiny planes in the future. But it wouldn't have made me afraid to take another trip. I used to say, like, I'm not a coward because I don't ride roller coasters. I don't need to ride roller coasters. Like, I fly on these tiny planes, and that's useful. I don't need to artificially create scary situations for myself. So having a situation where you learn how to process fear and how to feel good about something in spite of being afraid has been incredibly valuable to me. And that is not a mental thing. That's not learning how to reason it, how to think it out. It is being in the moment and surrendering to the feelings and letting it happen. And that's the thing, with me listening to metal, is it calls up this, like, I imagine myself, I am a warrior, I am a Valkyrie. Like, that's how I've imagined myself all of my life. And having that image of myself, when I'm able to tap into that image, I am able to perform feats of strength and daring that I can't do ordinarily. Like, it puts me in a different mental place. And I have this playlist that that I listen to, and this is so long now. Oh my God, I can't believe this. That invoke those feelings in me. One of the items that I listen to a lot is Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone. I've for the first leg of the trip, I'm like like freaking out, and obviously, like I said, taxi, like waiting for takeoff, is the worst part for me. Even at my best, like I would be a little bit nervous during that stage, like the first leg of my trip. And this is the funny thing, like I can be freaking out, and then the second I feel the nose lift, I relax a lot because I'm like, okay, it's normal. I recognize this sensation. I can handle this sensation, and I relax a lot. But anyway, so it's like, we're taxiing down the runway and I'm looking out and like, ugh. So I put this on and it's like highway to the danger zone, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something amazing. Um, and so I have this playlist of stuff that I listen to that is, it's cheesy metal stuff that's like, you are a warrior, you are brave, you are amazing, you can walk through fire, blah blah, you can ride the wind. And I mean, it's not just like, I listen to this stuff constantly now. Like, I prepare myself. I like to listen to it, like, especially when I'm on my way home from aerial, when I have, all the adrenaline in my system already. Um, so, the, and my crowning piece is my favorite band, Battle Beast, which I will talk about them at some other time. Uh, they have a song called Into the Heart of Danger, which is like my favorite song ever. And the chorus is, into the heart of danger, don't let the darkness enchain you. Walk into the heart of danger, face your fears. And like, I swear I've listened to this thing like 1,000 times since I flew to Romania in November. And I've actually like synced it up so that it has this really slow start at the beginning, which is, this is like the taxiing and the turning when you look down the runway, which is the worst part for me. And then it suddenly, there's like this noise that's almost like the engine test, and then it suddenly has this burst of speed, and then after like 30 seconds or something, this new chord comes in, and it's like, it perfectly mimics this pause and then the push, for takeoff and feeling the nose lift. And the and then at the end, as you're coming down, there's a part at the end of the chorus, at the very end of the song, and it just says, face your fear, face your fear. And then it sort of, there's this chord, and then it trails off into echoes. And this is, like where you impact at the end of your landing. And I've actually I listen to this over and over and over again and play it out in my mind, linking those situations and those sensations to my feelings with the song. And and then I listen to it during the actual situations to tap back into that. And I've gotten to the point where I can time it almost perfectly now. Like, seriously, the moments in the song really do match up almost perfectly with these stages in the flight, and I can time it now, and it will jumpstart my adrenaline and overtake my anxiety. So, I would love to run a fear of flying treatment course for people who are not into the whole like mind over emotion thing, and just, you know, because I really think that that's a lack that's missing out there. Um, and so what I would advise is, again, you need to find a way to take the edge off. You need to find a way to be in the moment and be able to cope with your anxiety in the moment by tapping into something. You need to find a way to tap your courage. And again, for me, it's a combination of listening to music that uh, calls up this warrior ethos that I like to believe I have, and regularly participating in a very, very enjoyable and beloved but very fear-provoking activity to teach me how to cope with that, and putting those things together. And then you have to just fly and fly and fly. Um, and that's the thing. I mean, the level of turbulence on this flight was this trip was way, way worse than the first trip. But I was way less anxious because my body had already learned to. And that's one of the things. Like, you will get scared during turbulence. It happens. Even, like I said, like, it will happen less often. The turbulence will have to be more severe. But every so often, you'll get rerouted onto a freaking tiny plane, or you'll hit a bad knot of weather or something. It will happen. So, like, what I've said, and this is something I've been able to gauge as I've flown more, is faster recovery time. Now, the thing is, so you get scared in the midst of turbulence, and then the turbulence stops. Sometimes it's even like, as I was describing, you have these bursts of turbulence and then it calms down again, and then you have more bursts of turbulence. What you want is to get to a point where when the plane calms down, say, okay, and you don't feel any distress in the moment because nothing's happening. You're not freaking out because it just happened or it's probably going to happen again. You pick your book back up and you go back to reading and you calm down, and you maybe you freak out again when the next round comes, but you are not freaking out anticipating it. Your rubber band snapback recovery, your return to normal when you are not in turbulence is quicker. Like, for me now, depending on how severe the turbulence is, if it's like fairly mild turbulence, it's instant recovery. For like when we were in the jet stream, I needed like 5 to 10 minutes to recover. But, you know, that's okay. Your recovery time will get shorter and shorter as it goes on. And also, like, for takeoff, for the Munich flight and for the Newark flight, like, I was, you know, I had my hands clasped praying. I was listening to my music. When I say I'm praying, it means I'm listening to metal. Like, that is how I pray. Like, no joke here. But, and then we pass through the cloud layer, it calms down, we level off, and I'm fine. Like that. And again, it's not having a perfect flight does not mean that it has failed. Again, the thing to look at is, how is your recovery time? Are you recovering faster after turbulence? I think that is the best gauge. So, I mean, am I 100% fine? No, definitely not, especially after that last leg yesterday. Do I think I'm well on the road to recovery? Yes. Maybe I'll check back in with this later. I don't know, but I just wanted to let you guys know with everything that I've done recently. So, yeah. Bye.